Chris Hummer has candidates. He's got candidates for the job. Again, we want to express it is the very, very, very early stages. The guy has been parted ways with, I guess is what they said. The guy's been parted ways with for just a few hours here. But this is kind of how this goes, where you start to get on the phone, all three of us, and you start to just talk with people in the industry, people on campus, and who makes sense. Chris Hummer had a great list earlier today at cbssports.com. I'll let you kind of rattle off some of these names as we go forward here.
Yeah, I will say it is very early, and I need to emphasize very, very early. But these are names that industry sources have brought up. And it's worth noting, like, administrators, search firms, and all these people aren't doing this in a vacuum. They go into a search, kind of have an idea of who at least is going to be on their list to consider. Like back channeling in some of these cases already happened, at least a little bit, like over this last, really for Oklahoma State, it goes back to last year when they thought they were going to fire Mike Gundy. So like this is a list that I think has some names that are going to have some legitimacy over time. We can talk about them more individually in a second. I'm just going to run through them. Texas State head coach G.J. Kinney, former Tulsa football player, quarterback there, very familiar with the area. Colin Klein at Texas A&M, the offensive coordinator, K-State great. Dana Holgerson, Shahan mentioned him earlier, former Oklahoma State offensive coordinator, Nebraska's offensive coordinator currently. I think he's going to get some attention this cycle if he wants to jump back in. A name to know is definitely Atlanta Falcons offensive coordinator Zach Robinson, former Mike Gundy quarterback, going to have a lot of backing from boosters at Oklahoma State. Barry Odom, Purdue's head coach, Oklahoma native. If this job had come open a year ago, I think he would have been at the top of that list potentially. Now there's a buyout to kind of overcome there. And I don't know if Oklahoma State's necessarily a better job than Purdue in this climate. We can debate that more if y'all want later. Eric Morrison.
That's a little, we'll definitely talk about that later.
I would side with Oklahoma State for what it's worth, but Eric Morrison from Texas, they're 4-0 right now. I think if you're looking to bring over a head coach, offensive coordinator, quarterback combo, I might look at North Texas if I was a school in need of a coach to cycle. Shannon Dawson at Miami, going to have a lot of interest to cycle their offensive coordinator. Will Stein, their offensive coordinator. And I think even like maybe if things get weird, like Rashad Samples at Oregon, former Oklahoma State football player himself before he transferred to Houston. Oregon's going to have a lot of attention on that coaching staff this year for potential head coach candidates. Those are all people in the industry have brought up.
Yeah, I would also I think that the name to note, I think, is Zach Robinson, because I think how Zach Robinson's, candidacy, so to speak, for this job goes, I think will kind of show you a little bit of where the wind is blowing with who's kind of steering the ship here. Like Chris, and I'm wondering if you've kind of heard similar. If this is like a booster run show, I think Zach Robinson's name is like the front of the line. And it's like if he tells us no. I don't know if you've heard any different, Chris.
I think it depends on what booster you talk to there. Like any search, boosters all have their individual friends. I think Dana Holgerson would be a very popular name among boosters there. Same thing with Barry Odom, if it goes that way. But holistically, yes, I tend to agree. Zach Robinson is a name that's going to have a ton of backing there from the booster class. He is sort of a soft transition out of the Mike Gundy era, if you will, given his ties there. And I mean, it's in Mike Gundy's contract. He gets to consult on the next hire. So maybe he consults with Zach Robinson as part of that.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's in there. It's in there.
So I do think, just to take a half step back, right? I do think that trying to gauge the attractiveness of this job is interesting, because we've heard, obviously, like, this is not one of the most well-moneyed programs in the country. That's not a secret. It also is obviously more well-moneyed than $7 million over 3 years. But again, we are looking around the landscape right now, and, Arkansas looks like it's going to come open, right? How do you compare it to a job like that? Obviously, Florida will certainly be ahead in line, but I think Virginia Tech is an interesting comp. Maybe you're just pulling from different buckets at that point, but, and while I think it's frankly insulting to me a little bit for Oklahoma State to be compared to Purdue being, at the bottom of a conference versus middle to upper level of a conference.
Right. But Shahan, the conference that Purdue is in right now is in a much better shape.
There's no question about it, right? But this is the question again, when you, for example, make the comparison to Arkansas. If you as a coach are making a decision, you are having to decide, are you going to be at the school that is 14th out of 16th in your conference for slightly more, more money, but not a crazy amount more money? Or would you rather be at a place like Oklahoma State that has the resource and backing to be a consistent playoff contender? If you're
does it have the resource and backing?
I think it does.
Well,
I think it does.
I think this is actually a really important thing to think about with this job, and we'll find out how Oklahoma State thinks about their own job based on who they go after as candidates. Because there's two ways you can go about hiring a person if you're Oklahoma State. You can go get the up-and-comer like GJ Kenny, who is on a fast track in college football head coaching circles. And if he goes to Oklahoma State, frankly, like if things go well, he won't be there for a particularly long time. He will be a SEC or a Big Ten head coach. Or you can go out and get somebody who wants to view Oklahoma State as a destination job, a stable job, and a place you can stay at and win over a long period of time. Like obviously the goal for both sides of that is to win. But I think there are two different types of candidates you can approach in that way. And we'll see what Oklahoma State prioritizes based on who they go after as their first tier of candidates. Because there is a world in which Oklahoma State goes from being a destination job, a place that Mike Gundy stayed at for 2 decades, to a bit of a stopgap job for people as they go places and try to move up the ladder. And it's fair to say that's Purdue, right? Like that is what Purdue is in the Big Ten. Purdue is a place you go for resources and you want to keep climbing. Oklahoma State doesn't have to be that, but I think it's moved into a place in the college football landscape where the top up-and-coming head coaches in the country aren't going to view that as a place you can stay forever. They're going to view that as a place you can win in the short term and go. And I think that's just the reality where the job is right now.
So I think this is like an interesting question about, kind of the landscape of the coaching world in general, right? Because, I think of a place, or I think of a coach like Lance Leipold at Kansas, right? Where there are conversations that he had with Big Ten teams. Chris Kleiman, kind of a similar example, right? And it sort of gets into the question of like, what is the relative value of leaving? Not necessarily is this job better than this job, but is this job so much better? Is Minnesota so much better than Kansas that you leave that job for that job? I think that that's a legitimate question that coach are having to ask yourself. And by the way, in a world where you're getting paid $5-6 million to be at Oklahoma State, I think that that's a more difficult question than asking, do you want to go be at a program where you don't have the resource to necessarily compete? And again, this is a question that I think coaches have to ask themselves. Different coaches are going to have different perspectives on that, right? It's like, and again, like the other thing too, because like if Oklahoma State, for example, right, like when the elite of the elite SEC jobs came open, like sure, they can take whoever they want, right? Alabama, Mike
Gundy tried to go to Tennessee.
Yeah, Tennessee, 100%. Yeah. But like, I think that again, it starts getting into like if Mississippi State comes calling, are you leaving for that? If Arkansas comes calling, are you leaving for that? If Illinois comes, we'll see what Illinois is long term. But
the question, John, the question is, do Illinois you just said Illinois, that's why. But does Arkansas have more money and resource? I'm not talking about your salary. I'm talking about there's a rev share number that you have to hit to be competitive. Is Oklahoma State ready, willing, and able to spend that? Because you look like we'll take Oklahoma State and kind of compare it to another open job, Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech is quite literally going to have a board of governors meeting on September 30th, next Tuesday, to basically approve $50 million additional to their athletic department operating budget. If they don't do that, then Virginia Tech is going to stay in a bad job category where they just don't have the resources to be a serious competitor in the next phase of college athletics. Where does Oklahoma State lie? Where is Oklahoma State in that paradigm and that pantheon? It's all well and good to think about it as this kind of conceptual thing, but it's a matter of dollars and cents, literally.
Well, Richard, let's just go through real quick, and we'll all three of us rank the jobs and how you view them and how you would take them. We don't need to spend a long time on this. Just 1, 2, 3. I'll start. It's Virginia Tech, Oklahoma State, UCLA. That's how I would rank it. Like, how would you?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. But I got to see if Virginia Tech is actually going to get this revenue thing passed. If they don't, I think Virginia Tech honestly drops to the bottom of the barrel.
This is still 20. I'm looking at, this is not the most recent numbers, but this is 2023 distributions. Virginia Tech's revenue was above UCLA and Oklahoma State back in 2023, 24. And if they add additional revenue streams to their budget, like I think they're going to be the most well-funded of all three of those schools, even with the Big Ten money flowing into UCLA.
I will say this. There's two things that have to be kind of factored in about that. With the ACC, the revenue distributions are now changing to more of a, they call them success initiatives, where they're literally, it's going to be kind of a keep what you kill in the sense of success. So it's kind of harder to peg at that. The other thing about the proposed $50 million per year over the next 4 years that Virginia Tech is hoping to get from its university, a heavy amount of that, almost half, comes from philanthropy. And the open question right now at Virginia Tech is what happens if you are not able to raise that money? What if you fall short? So even though Virginia Tech is telling everybody that they're pretty close to getting $50 million per year locked in, that $50 million number in and of itself is not necessarily hard and fast locked in. Some of it comes from student fees, some of it comes from the university side, but a heavy, heavy portion of it comes from philanthropy, comes from donations. Guess what it's hard to do when your football program stinks? It's raise money. It's a difficult thing. So there are some, when you go inside on the Virginia Tech thing, there are some very, very interesting machinations